The trash bags were still in their garage when I arrived to babysit my granddaughter, labeled MISC, but filled with my things. Still, I didn't knock, I just stared at the photo of my late husband crushed under a winter coat I bought them. As the plastic shifted, it made the same hollow sound I heard packing my son's college dorm. While he brushed past me with car keys and no eye contact, I smiled like I didn't see it. That's when I realized my own son and his wife had quietly moved me out without saying a word. So I held their spare key, stepped outside, and called the bank on my house. We're about to begin, but if you'd like, share where you're joining from. It reminds me this story doesn't echo into silence, it lands somewhere real. Drop it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. Evelyn Brooks arrived at her son's suburban Denver home just as the late afternoon light stretched across the driveway, turning the neighborhood gold. The house looked the same as always, fresh mulch, trimmed hedges, the faint echo of children playing somewhere down the street. Yet the moment she stepped out of her car, a subtle unease pressed at her ribs, the kind she'd learned never to ignore. Kendra opened the front door before Evelyn even reached it. Her smile was brisk, practiced, the kind meant for social functions, not family. "We cleared some space in the garage for you," she said, voice rushed as if trying to slip the words past scrutiny. Garage, the word landed with a dull thud. Before Evelyn could respond, Jason appeared behind his wife, keys in hand, the weekend energy of someone already halfway out the door. He leaned in, kissed his mother's cheek, and murmured, "We'll be back Sunday night." His attention didn't linger long enough to register her confusion. Inside, the house gleamed with a fresh lemon scent and a new arrangement of furniture, Kendra's endless, refreshing. Evelyn scanned the space, searching for the guest room light that usually welcomed her presence. Instead, the hallway felt unfamiliar, as though someone had quietly erased her from the layout. She stepped into what used to be her room. The bed sat stripped down to its mattress pad, the nightstand missing entirely, the framed photo of her late husband gone. So were her books, her knitting basket, even the extra blanket she always folded at the end of the bed for chilly nights. For a long moment, Evelyn simply stood there, hands still, breath measured. Years in HR had trained her to absorb uncomfortable truths before responding to them. This one settled slowly, coldly. She turned and made her way to the garage. A motion light flickered on, revealing two large black trash bags propped against a storage shelf. One had COATS scrawled across it, the other read MISC. Both were sealed tight with duct tape. Through the thin plastic, she recognized the outline of her winter coat, the corner of her knitting basket, and a wooden frame she knew too well, the photo of her husband, pushed into a trash bag like clutter. Evelyn didn't startle, she didn't gasp or call out. Her expression barely shifted. She simply exhaled, the sound soft enough to be mistaken for a sigh of mild inconvenience rather than betrayal. From the doorway, tiny footsteps echoed. Mila's voice bounced into the garage. "Grandma, are you here?" Evelyn straightened, smoothing her blouse as she turned. The child ran toward her with a smile wide enough to crack through any bitterness. Evelyn stepped forward, instinctively catching her in a gentle hug. "I'm here, sweetheart," she said, steady and warm. Back inside, she helped Mila settle at the dining table with her homework. Math worksheets spread across the wood surface, pencils rolling toward the edge. Evelyn listened to her granddaughter chatter about school projects and a new art assignment. Her movements remained fluid, patient, every gesture calm. But behind her steady demeanor, her mind worked in quiet, precise lines, gathering facts, connecting dots, filing away every detail of what she'd walked into. Kendra walked past them twice without meeting Evelyn's eyes. Jason moved through the kitchen, tapping at his phone, never glancing toward the garage. Evelyn guided Mila through long division while her thoughts drifted elsewhere, to a signed set of papers tucked away in a safe deposit box, to a conversation with a bank manager years earlier, to a fact her son and daughter-in-law seemed to have forgotten. 40%. Ownership didn't vanish simply because someone pretended it wasn't there. As Mila handed her another worksheet, Evelyn offered a soft smile. She wasn't angry, not yet. Anger required energy. This moment called for something far more deliberate. And as the evening settled around them, she knew one thing with absolute clarity. What they had started, she would finish. The real consequences hadn't even begun. Dinner unfolded under the warm pendant lights of the Brooks kitchen, but a chill threaded quietly through the room. Evelyn sat beside Mila, helping her cut a piece of chicken while Kendra moved around the table with the airy confidence of someone staging a lifestyle video. Every gesture felt deliberate, every smile a touch too polished. "We've been simplifying lately," Kendra said as she set down a bowl of roasted vegetables. The statement floated out lightly, almost musical, masking the pointed edge beneath it. "Just trying to reset the house energy, make everything feel lighter." Jason shifted in his seat, eyes darting toward Evelyn before dropping quickly to his plate. "You know how it is, Mom," he mumbled. "It's nothing personal, we're just evolving the space." The phrase hung there, flimsy but rehearsed. Evelyn offered a gentle smile, one that didn't reach her eyes. She recognized that tone, the soft, overly considerate cadence of someone delivering an unwelcome decision while pretending it was communal progress. She used it herself in conference rooms where job titles changed overnight and desks disappeared by morning. Mila, oblivious to the tension, talked about an upcoming school art showcase. Her voice filled the silence adults avoided touching. When dinner ended, Kendra whisked plates away quickly as though movement could erase discomfort. Jason retreated into his phone again, neither asked if Evelyn needed anything. That omission was intentional enough to answer itself. Later, when the house settled into quiet pockets of evening routine, Evelyn slipped back into the garage. The motion sensor light clicked on, exposing the same black bags waiting where she'd first seen them. She didn't hesitate this time. One by one, she lifted them, feeling the familiar weight of her belongings press against her palms. Her winter coat. Her knitting. The frame she had once dusted every Sunday. She carried the bags to her car, loading them gently into the trunk. Not a single tear, not a tremor, just a steady efficiency, years of discipline refined into practiced calm. When she closed the trunk, the click echoed louder than expected in the quiet Denver night. It sounded like a line being drawn. Inside her car, she pulled out her phone and scrolled to the contact she hadn't needed in more than a decade: Carmen Russell, bank manager. Carmen picked up on the second ring, her voice still carrying the same grounded steadiness Evelyn remembered. "Evelyn, everything all right?" Evelyn hesitated for only a moment. "I need to confirm something," she said. "The cosign on Jason's house, my portion, is still active, correct?" There was a brief silence followed by the rustle of papers. Then Carmen's voice returned, firmer now. "Yes, 40%, unchanged since 2011. Evelyn closed her eyes, not in relief but in recognition. The truth had always been there, sitting quietly in legal ink. She had simply trusted she would never need to invoke it. "I see," she murmured. Carmen exhaled softly. "Do you need me to start a file?" Evelyn didn't answer immediately. She looked through the windshield at the house she'd helped her son buy, the porch she once decorated for holidays, the windows she'd washed when Kendra was too pregnant to bend, the yard where she'd pushed Mila on a plastic swing. A space that had slowly shifted its borders until she no longer fit inside. "Yes," she finally said, "open it." When she ended the call, she didn't start the car. She simply sat there, letting the weight of her choice settle around her like a second skin. She hadn't reminded Jason about her share in the home because she'd thought he remembered. She'd thought he cared. But now she understood exactly what silence had cost her. And what it would cost them. The next move wouldn't be quiet. The following morning, Denver's sky stretched in a pale winter blue as Evelyn pushed open the glass doors of Aspen Heights Community Bank. The lobby was quiet, the kind of quiet built on polished floors, soft voices, and the faint scent of paper and toner. She walked with the composed assurance of someone who had spent decades navigating boardrooms where certainty mattered more than volume. Carmen Russell spotted her before she reached the counter. The bank manager stepped out from her office, her expression shifting from surprise to something more weighted, respect mixed with concern. "Come in," she said gently. Inside the office, sunlight filtered through frosted windows, catching on framed certificates and the neat stacks of files that marked Carmen's methodical nature. Evelyn sat across from her, folding her hands in her lap. There was no tremor, no flinch, only focus. "I need the full mortgage file," Evelyn said quietly, "everything tied to the house." Carmen nodded and pulled a thick folder from a cabinet. She set it on the desk, opened it, and began sliding documents toward Evelyn one by one: the original loan, the cosign agreement, years of statements. Then a new document appeared, one Evelyn had never seen. A home equity line of credit. Recently drawn. Carmen's lips pressed into a thin line. This was added 2 years ago. It required dual authorization. Evelyn's face remained composed, though a slow, precise calculation began behind her eyes. I wasn't contacted. You should have been. Carmen tapped the signature line, Kendra's name alone, scrawled in confident blue ink. No second signature, no approval from the co-owner whose stake had made the original loan possible. A legal breach. Carmen leaned back, measuring her words. If you choose to pursue action, this will hold. Evelyn didn't look away from the paper. Her expression stayed still, almost serene, the way a lake looks moments before a storm begins to gather beneath the surface. Print everything, she said. By the time she walked out of the bank with a sealed envelope tucked under her arm, the air outside felt sharper, not colder, just clearer, as if the world had aligned itself around a truth she could no longer ignore. Later that evening, in the quiet of her small rental apartment, Evelyn set the envelope on the dining table. She crossed the room to a narrow hallway closet and reached for a key hanging on a thin blue ribbon. The locked wooden box she retrieved had been untouched for years, the grain worn smooth by time rather than use. She placed it on the table, turned the key, and lifted the lid. Inside lay old notarized papers, loan copies, cosign agreements, a power of attorney form she had never activated but had kept just in case. Her late husband's neat cursive appeared on several older pages, a small ache threading through her chest as she touched the familiar strokes. She sorted each document with quiet precision, building a stack that told a story Jason and Kendra had hoped she'd forgotten. She hadn't. She had simply allowed trust to take the place of vigilance. A soft knock pulled her from her thoughts. Mila peeked around the doorframe, clutching a stuffed gray rabbit by the ear. She'd been dropped off for the evening while her parents attended a neighborhood dinner. "Grandma," she whispered, "are you staying forever?" Evelyn's throat tightened, not with emotion she couldn't control, but with the tenderness of choosing the right truth for a child. She gathered Mila gently onto her lap. "Not here," she said, brushing a curl from the girl's forehead, "but you and I will always have time together, that won't change." Mila accepted this with the ease only children possess, resting her head against Evelyn's shoulder. The weight of her trust settled like a promise Evelyn intended to keep. When Mila wandered off to draw, Evelyn returned to the documents, her expression firmer now. She picked up her phone and dialed Carmen again. "I've reviewed everything," Evelyn said. "Then you should know," Carmen replied. "I can initiate proceedings to temporarily freeze any further changes to the property." Quietly, no alarms raised. For a moment, Evelyn simply watched the shadows stretch across her table, the last of the daylight fading into something steadier, more deliberate. "Yes," she said, "begin." She ended the call and placed the signed papers into the wooden box, closing the lid with a resolute finality. Tonight, she understood one thing with unshakable clarity. If they wanted her out, they had just opened the wrong door. By the time Jason and Kendra pulled into their driveway late Sunday evening, the house sat in a quiet stillness. Porch lights glowed softly, but there was no extra car parked along the curb, no sign of Evelyn's gentle presence inside. Mila, half asleep in the back seat, didn't notice, but Kendra did. She paused at the bottom of the steps, a faint crease appearing between her brows. "Did she leave early?" she asked, more annoyed than concerned. Jason shrugged, juggling the suitcases with distracted clumsiness. Maybe she didn't want to wait up. But the moment they stepped inside, the absence became unmistakable. The guest room, already stripped earlier in the week, felt colder now, as if someone had closed a book mid-sentence and walked away. The dining table was clear, no knitting basket, no jacket draped neatly over a chair, nothing that suggested Evelyn had been there at all. Kendra pulled out her phone. A brisk text went out, polished and sweetened in her usual public-facing tone. "Hope you made it home okay, thanks again." It took less than a minute for the reply to arrive. "You're welcome, we'll be in touch through the bank." Kendra stared at the message, the color draining slowly from her face. The phrasing wasn't emotional, it wasn't angry, it was formal, borderline professional. The kind of language someone used when they'd stopped being part of the family dynamic and stepped into a different arena entirely. She reread it twice before thrusting the phone toward Jason. What does this mean? He scanned the text, brow furrowing. I don't know, she probably just has questions. But even he didn't believe that. Monday morning, while Jason was still sipping coffee and Kendra scrolled anxiously through her email, a new notification chimed. Notice of ownership restrictions, Aspen Heights Community Bank. Kendra's eyes widened, she clicked it open. The document laid it out cleanly. Due to the confirmed status of partial co-ownership, all future financial actions, including refinancing, credit lines, and home equity adjustments, now require dual sign-off from both property stakeholders. A sharp breath tore from her throat. What is this? Jason set his mug down too fast, coffee sloshed over the rim. Let me see. As he read, his shoulders sank, every line deepened the realization dawning across his face. She still has stake, it's 40%, it never changed. Kendra's voice pitched upward. Why didn't you tell me she still had ownership? We've been making decisions for years, Jason, years. He rubbed the back of his neck, eyes avoiding hers. I forgot, she never acted like she cared, she never said anything. Kendra stood so abruptly her chair scraped across the floor. You forgot? Her laugh was brittle, cracking around the edges. We remodeled the kitchen, we changed the landscaping, I opened a credit line. She stopped, realizing too late she'd said more than she meant to. Jason turned sharply. You what? Kendra's jaw clenched, words skirting the truth. It was necessary at the time and you didn't ask questions. Jason stared at her, confused and cornered. I thought everything was under control. Her glare snapped back to the email, then to his bewildered expression. It was, until now. She paced the kitchen, breath shallow, fury simmering. She's doing this on purpose, she wants to make things difficult. Jason sank into a chair, shaking his head slowly. No, she's doing something else. Kendra stopped. What? He lifted his eyes, guilt settling into his features. She's protecting herself. A heavy silence filled the room, thick enough to choke on. Outside, a delivery truck pulled away from the curb. The driver left nothing behind, no package, no note, just the faint echo of movement that faded into the suburban quiet. Inside the Brooks home, the real delivery had already arrived. And neither of them knew just how much it was about to cost. Because Evelyn's next notice was already in motion. Evelyn returned to Aspen Heights Community Bank the next morning with the clarity of someone who had sifted through every piece of history and arrived at a single conclusion. She walked past the tellers and into Carmen's office without hesitation. Carmen looked up, immediately sensing the shift in her demeanor, calm, composed, but with a decisive edge that hadn't been there the week before. Evelyn, she greeted softly, I take it you're ready for the next step. Evelyn set a slim folder on the desk. I want my liability removed, completely. Carmen blinked, then nodded slowly. You understand what that triggers? I do. Removing herself from liability meant forcing the bank to take action on the co-ownership imbalance, an imbalance created by decisions she had never been consulted on. Carmen pulled up the account, her fingers steady on the keyboard. Once filed, she said, there are only two outcomes, a structured buyout or a mandatory sale of the property. Evelyn didn't flinch. File it. Their eyes met, Carmen's full of support, Evelyn's full of resolve. With one final keystroke, Carmen initiated the process that would land like a small earthquake in Jason and Kendra's inbox. Across town, the notice arrived an hour later. Jason was in the kitchen rinsing out his coffee mug when his phone buzzed with a new email from the bank. He tapped it open casually, then froze. Notice, pending partition due to shared equity conflict. His breath stilled, the words blurred for a moment before sinking sharply into place. A forced buyout or a sale they couldn't control. Kendra came around the corner, still bristling from the stress of the previous day. What now? She asked, irritation already sharpened. Jason handed her the phone, his face drained of color. She read the notice once, then again. No, she whispered, voice cracking with disbelief. no, she can't do this. But she already had. Kendra's hands shook as she dialed Evelyn's number. When Evelyn answered, her tone was steady, almost serene. "What are you doing?" Kendra demanded, her composure fraying at the edges. "Reclaiming my name," Evelyn replied, "and removing it from your debts." The silence that followed wasn't confusion, it was fury. Kendra swallowed hard, searching for leverage she no longer had. "You're punishing us." Evelyn's voice remained even. "I'm protecting myself. You made choices without my consent. I'm simply acknowledging them." She didn't raise her voice, she didn't accuse, she didn't have to. Kendra ended the call abruptly, her breath coming in short, uneven bursts. She paced the kitchen, pulling at the sleeve of her sweater while Jason sat at the table staring at the email that threatened to unravel everything he'd built or believed he had. "What do we do?" he finally whispered. Kendra spun toward him. "We refinance." "With what income, Kendra?" he snapped, frustration boiling through his fear. "We're stretched as it is and the interest rates have jumped. We can't just." She cut him off, her eyes blazing. "Then fix it." Jason stared at her, stunned by the command he had no way to fulfill. "There is no fixing this, not without her signature, and she's not signing anything." The truth settled between them like heavy dust, undeniable, suffocating. Kendra sank into a chair, hands pressed to her temples. "If she forces a sale, we lose everything." Jason didn't answer, he didn't need to. Across the miles, Evelyn sat on her small balcony watching the evening unfold over Denver. She held a cup of tea between her palms, her posture relaxed, not triumphant, not vindictive, just certain. The first move was complete. And now the house that had tried to push her out would learn who truly decided its fate. Because Evelyn was done being quiet and she had only just begun. Late on Tuesday evening, Evelyn was sorting through a small stack of mail when her phone buzzed on the counter. The caller ID made her pause. Mila. The hour alone told her the child hadn't made this call with permission. When Evelyn answered, the only sound at first was quiet breathing, shaky and uneven. "Grandma," Mila's voice finally emerged, thin and frightened. "When are you coming back? Mom said you're busy." Evelyn leaned against the kitchen counter, eyes closing for a brief moment. "I'm here, sweetheart," she murmured. "I'm not gone." "But you're not at the house," Mila pressed, tears threading through each word. "It feels weird without you. I don't like it." Evelyn softened, lowering herself into a chair. She imagined the child huddled under her blankets, clutching that worn gray rabbit. "We're going to have our own space again soon," she said gently. "A place you can visit whenever you want, somewhere peaceful." The crying eased, replaced by sniffles. "Promise." "I do," Evelyn said, steady and certain. A door creaked on Mila's end. The girl whispered a hurried goodbye and hung up. Evelyn stared at the dark screen for a long moment before setting the phone down with deliberate care. She had expected consequences, but not Mila's heartbreak. Still, she knew that some fractures needed to happen before something stronger could be built. The next morning, her inbox chimed with a message from Jason. Not a text. An email. The subject line read, "Apologies and clarification." Inside, the wording was formal, rehearsed, the kind of apology drafted after several failed attempts. He took full responsibility and assured her he had never intended disrespect. He wrote about miscommunications, about adjustments within the household. At the end, he added a line that felt almost desperate. "I hope we can talk soon. Please let me know what you need." There was no signature from Kendra. Evelyn closed the email without replying. Jason was reaching, but not enough to extend beyond his wife's influence, and she had no intention of giving them clarity before they earned it. Minutes later, another email arrived, this one from Carmen. Notice. The property now has 60 days to complete a buyout agreement or initiate a market listing. Failure to comply will result in mandatory bank action. Evelyn read the notice twice, feeling no triumph in it, only inevitability. Across town, Kendra tried to salvage her image. On Saturday, she hosted a brunch for her neighborhood circle, arranging fresh tulips in a vase and lighting a citrus candle as if the right scent could erase tension. She spoke brightly, performing ease with the same precision she used for her curated posts. Just a little rough week, she laughed, waving away concern. Family stuff, but we're managing. Her guests nodded politely, sipping mimosas. Conversations spilled into home renovations, PTA events, travel plans. For a moment, Kendra almost convinced herself the facade was working. Then one of the women, Paige, a realtor with a sharp memory for names on deeds, tilted her head. I didn't know Evelyn still had ownership, she said casually. I saw her name on the public filings when I was researching comps. The room stilled. Kendra's smile slipped, then snapped back into place. Oh yes, well, old paperwork, nothing important. But the shift had already happened. Eyes flicked toward her, assessing, curious, the kind of attention that wasn't admiration. Kendra busied herself refilling glasses to avoid their looks, her hands trembling enough to clink the bottles against the stems. In the corner of the room, Jason stood stiffly, his face pale. He had overheard the comment and he knew exactly what it meant. The story was no longer contained. The clock was ticking. And 60 days wasn't long. That evening, Evelyn folded laundry in her quiet apartment, unaware her name had just begun circulating through the neighborhood, no longer in whispers but in recognition. She paused, sensing a shift she couldn't yet name. The fallout had finally begun. By the following week, a rhythm had settled around Evelyn: quiet mornings, steady afternoons, evenings marked by calls with Carmen and short visits with Mila. But beneath that calm, the legal machinery she had set in motion hummed with growing momentum. On Thursday, she drove back to the bank, rain tapping lightly across her windshield. Inside, the lobby felt cooler than usual, as if the air itself sensed the shift in power. Carmen ushered her into the office with a nod that needed no explanation. We've confirmed your standing, Carmen said, sliding a document across the desk. Your name is still on the deed. That gives you the right to restrict changes until the conflict is resolved. Evelyn adjusted her glasses and read every line, slow and deliberate. When she lifted her pen to sign, her hand didn't waver. I want restrictions placed immediately, she said. No remodeling, no refinancing, nothing that changes the valuation. Carmen's smile was small but approving, already prepared. Next came a separate folder, thick, stapled, and marked with a date that made Evelyn's stomach tighten. This, Carmen said carefully, is evidence of the unauthorized credit line, signed only by Kendra. You never approved it. The room stilled. For a long moment, Evelyn stared at the signature, looped, confident, unmistakably Kendra's. There was no anger in her face, only a recognition of something that had been sitting just out of sight, a final confirmation. And the bank, Evelyn asked. We're opening a quiet inquiry, Carmen replied. Nothing public for now, but it won't stay quiet forever. Evelyn exhaled slowly. She understood. The house conflict was no longer about feelings, it had become a matter of financial integrity. Across town, Jason arrived at Evelyn's door unannounced, soaked from the drizzle, eyes rimmed red with exhaustion. When she opened the door, he looked smaller than she remembered, strained, uncertain, a boy trying to navigate a problem too large for him. Mom, he said softly, I need to talk. She stepped aside, allowing him in. He stood awkwardly in the middle of her living room, taking in the tidy space she'd created without them, a space that suited her, a space free of erasure. We didn't mean to make you feel unwelcome, Jason said, voice cracking on the last word. It got complicated, and Kendra thought, well, I don't know what she thought, but I never wanted this. Evelyn watched him carefully, not unkindly, but without offering a lifeline. He was searching for absolution she couldn't give. You didn't make me feel anything, she said, her tone calm, level. You made decisions, and now the consequences belong to you. Jason blinked, stunned by the clarity of it, by the boundary he had never seen her draw before. He opened his mouth to speak again but shut it when he realized he had no argument that didn't implicate himself. Before he could gather another sentence, Evelyn's phone buzzed on the counter. She crossed the room and checked the screen, a message from Carmen. Freeze authorized, all property changes suspended until further notice. The last hinge dropped into place. She turned the phone face down and offered Jason a small, restrained nod toward the door. Take care of Mela, she said gently. She's the only one I'm concerned about. Jason left wordlessly, shoulders slumped, the weight of consequences following him down the hallway. Alone again, Evelyn stood at her window, watching the rain gather in thin streams along the glass. She thought of her late husband, of the quiet strength he'd always admired in her. She wondered what he'd say now. Probably nothing. He would simply stand beside her, silent support in the face of a storm. Lightning flashed softly in the distance. Because the storm was coming. And the next strike was going to hit the Brooks household harder than they imagined. The mediation room inside the county dispute center looked nothing like a courtroom. No dark wood, no elevated benches, just a long table, neutral walls, and a clock that ticked louder than anyone spoke. Still, tension clung to the air like humidity before a storm. Evelyn sat at one end of the table, her lawyer beside her, a calm woman with sharp eyes and a stack of color-coded folders. Across from them, Jason and Kendra took their seats. Jason avoided everyone's eyes. Kendra lifted her chin as if stepping into a photo shoot rather than a legal proceeding. The mediator offered polite greetings, outlined the agenda, and invited each party to speak. Evelyn didn't lean forward. She didn't straighten papers or clear her throat. She simply folded her hands and let the silence stretch just long enough to be felt. Her attorney slid a thick file across the table, documentation in crisp, chronological order, copies of the original deed, the cosign agreement, statements showing years of payments, and carefully placed on top the record of the unauthorized credit line bearing only Kendra's signature. Words weren't necessary, the paper said everything. The mediator scanned the documents, eyebrows lifting slightly. Jason's shoulders curled inward as he recognized every date. Kendra's eyes flicked from page to page, her grip tightening around the pen in her hand. Finally, Kendra attempted a smile, thin, brittle. We all know Evelyn is very detail-oriented, but this wasn't malicious. Families evolve, expectations shift. She aimed for warmth but landed closer to sales pitch. Evelyn remained silent. When charm failed, Kendra pivoted. We opened our home to her, she said, voice softening. We cared for her and we've been under tremendous pressure. This whole situation could ruin us. Surely she doesn't want that. Evelyn's expression didn't move. The mediator looked toward Evelyn as if expecting a rebuttal. Evelyn simply folded one document back into place with quiet precision. Her lawyer lifted her chin slightly. My client has acted within every legal right afforded to her. She has made no false claims. She has made no threats. These are documented facts. Kendra exhaled sharply, patience thinning. If she keeps pushing this, we'll have no choice but to. Her lawyer cut her off. Mrs. Brooks, considering your current legal position, I would advise caution with vague ultimatums. A flush climbed Kendra's neck. She leaned back, arms crossed tightly, swallowing what she'd been prepared to say. Jason finally lifted his head, eyes glassy with something close to shame. Mom, why didn't you tell us you were keeping all this? Evelyn looked at him, not cruelly, not coldly, just truthfully. You never asked, she saw. Id. The words were gentle and devastating. Jason flinched as though struck, realization settling over him like a weight he could no longer ignore. He looked down at the table, hands clasped tightly, unable to meet his mother's gaze again. The mediator continued with procedural explanations, but Evelyn's attention drifted to her tote bag resting at her feet. A corner of colored paper peeked out. Mela's recent drawings slipped in days earlier with small, hopeful hands. When Evelyn opened the bag to retrieve a pen, two of the drawings fluttered out. One was a house with 2 windows and a garden. The other showed 2 figures holding hands, one tall, one small, with the words written in uneven pencil strokes. I want to live with Grandma. The room went still. Jason's breath caught, Kendra's jaw hardened, even the mediator paused. Evelyn lifted the drawing, smoothing its crumpled edges with tender fingers. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft enough to hush the entire table. Children see what adults try to bury. She didn't have to explain, not the meaning, not the consequence. The mediator cleared his throat, gathering his notes with renewed seriousness. Given the evidence and the emotional implications, this matter is no longer simply financial. Kendra opened her mouth to protest, but the mediator raised a hand. There will be additional evaluations, he said, and potential implications for occupancy stability. Kendra froze. Jason swallowed hard. Evelyn placed Mila's drawing carefully back into her bag. Because the next phase wasn't about the house anymore. It was about who truly created a home. The sale closed faster than anyone expected. Pressure from the bank, the inquiry into the unauthorized credit line, and the mediator's recommendations left Jason and Kendra with no ground to stall on. Within 6 weeks, the house that had once symbolized stability was reduced to paperwork, signatures, and wire transfers. Evelyn accepted her portion of the proceeds with quiet finality. There was no celebration, no vindication, only a decision she had long prepared for. 2 days later, she toured a modest 2-bedroom condo on the east side of Denver, tucked near a line of cottonwoods that whispered when the wind passed through them. The place held sunlight in every room, the walls soft and warm without trying too hard. It felt like possibility. She made an offer the same afternoon. It was accepted by morning. When she received the keys, Evelyn sat alone in the living room for a long moment, letting the emptiness surround her not as loneliness but as space she had earned. Eventually, she opened her bag and placed the new deed on the counter. Then she added a second document, the trust agreement she'd drafted with her attorney before the closing date. The condo and her remaining assets would pass directly to Mila at 21, not to Jason, certainly not to Kendra. To Mila. A home secured for the child before the world could teach her it might be taken away. When Mila visited for the first time, she darted from room to room, her socks sliding across the laminate flooring as she giggled. She touched everything: cabinets, light switches, the balcony door, as if claiming the place with her small palms. "This is our new place," she said confidently. Evelyn felt her heart shift, soft but certain. She knelt beside her. "Yes, sweetheart, ours." There was no correction, no disclaimers. Children sometimes spoke truer than adults dared. They spent the afternoon arranging books, choosing a spot for Mila's art supplies, and hanging the small drawings she'd made during the mediation days. The picture labeled "I want to live with Grandma" now hung above the bedroom door like a quiet oath. When Jason came to pick her up, he paused in the doorway, taking in the tidy space with an expression that held both relief and regret. "She looks happy here," he said quietly. "She feels safe," Evelyn replied. He nodded, unsure where to place his hands, his eyes drawn to the trust documents still resting on the counter. He didn't ask, not yet. But he would. News of the condo reached Kendra another way, through a title search she initiated while attempting to understand the sale's aftermath. Her reaction came in the form of a furious call that Evelyn let ring twice before answering. "So that's it," Kendra burst out. "You used our buyout to bribe her, to lure her away." Evelyn looked out the window at the cottonwoods swaying against the twilight. Her voice remained level, unshaken. "I gave her stability, something you pretended I disrupted." Kendra scoffed, breath sharp with indignation. "You're manipulating her." "No," Evelyn said simply. "I'm preparing for her future." Kendra launched into accusations, but Evelyn didn't need to hear them. She ended the call with the same quiet finality she'd applied to every decision since the day she found her belongings in trash bags. In the weeks that followed, Jason began visiting alone. Sometimes he brought a small repair tool, pretending the condo needed adjusting. Other times he came empty-handed, unsure how to apologize for a wound he hadn't fully understood until it was too late. He didn't ask for forgiveness, he didn't expect resolution. He just sat with his mother, speaking softly, letting silence fill the space between them. It wasn't reconciliation. It was the start of something more honest. One evening, after Jason left and the condo settled into stillness, Evelyn stood on the balcony, feeling the night breeze brush past her. She sensed a shift on the horizon, not conflict, but the first signs of a life she had built entirely on her own terms. And someone else, far less ready, was about to feel its full weight. Kendra's response to losing control wasn't introspection, it was content. 2 days after the sale finalized, she posted a carefully edited story to her influencer account. sunlit kitchen, soft piano music, and a caption crafted to sound both pained and noble. We lovingly cared for family until boundaries had to be set. Sometimes protecting your home means making difficult choices. Polished sympathetic. A narrative designed to keep her world intact. Jason appeared briefly in the background of the clip, offering a stiff smile before slipping out of frame, as if even he couldn't stand inside the lie for more than a heartbeat. Evelyn didn't comment, she didn't even watch the full video. She didn't need to. The truth, her truth, was already sitting quietly in public filings. The deed history. The ownership freeze. The forced sale. The trust. Facts carry their own weight, and they don't require hashtags. 3 days later, a ripple began on a local parenting forum, one of those groups where neighborhood gossip turned into measured concerns. Someone linked to the property filings, then typed a single sentence. "This looks like quiet elder abuse hiding behind wine moms." The thread exploded. People who knew none of them weighed in. Others recognized Kendra from school events, from curated brunch posts, from brand partnerships where she talked about family values. Screenshots circulated her garage comment, her story about boundaries, even glimpses of the stripped guest room from older vlogs. The veneer cracked. Then the replies turned. "This doesn't look like boundaries, it looks like eviction. How do you toss out the person who helped you buy your house?" She didn't forget the cosign, she counted on everyone else forgetting. By the end of the day, Kendra's follower count ticked downward in real time. Former collaborators backed away. Sponsors paused contracts. A friend she'd tagged in workouts unfollowed her publicly, adding a pointed comment. "Not the woman I thought she was." Kendra tried to control the narrative, posting airy quotes about misunderstanding and private matters, but none of it stuck. You can't curate your way out of a paper trail. Meanwhile, Evelyn remained silent. She spent her days helping Mila with homework at the condo table, watering the small basil plant on her balcony, greeting neighbors when she took out the recycling. She never mentioned the online thread. She didn't have to. The world had finally shifted on its own axis, revealing what she'd known all along. One afternoon, while retrieving her mail, Evelyn ran into her neighbor from across the hall, Mrs. Chan, a retired teacher with sharp instincts and soft manners. Later that evening, Evelyn received an email from her. "I don't know what happened, but I believe you. People show themselves in patterns, not posts." Evelyn read the message twice, warmed not by validation, but by recognition from someone who owed her nothing. A week later, Mila walked into the condo holding her tablet as delicately as if it might break. Her eyes were wide, uncertain. "Grandma, someone wrote something about you," she said quietly. Alarm pricked at Evelyn's nerves. She never wanted the child tangled in adult storms. "What did you see?" Mila climbed onto the couch beside her and turned the screen around. It showed a comment under the long thread. "Your grandma sounds like a real lady." Mila grinned shyly. "I liked that one." Evelyn felt her breath catch, not from pride but from something deeper, steadier. She tucked a curl behind Mila's ear, the gesture soft as a promise. "Thank you for showing me," she said, "and thank you for knowing who I am." Mila nestled into her side, unbothered by the chaos unfolding beyond the condo walls. Outside, the sun dipped low, casting the room in amber light. Evelyn closed her eyes briefly, letting the warmth touch her face. Because the world had begun speaking for her. And soon, someone else would have to answer for what the world had seen. Evelyn was organizing a shelf in her bedroom closet when a small cardboard box slipped forward, nudged loose by a stack of folded linens. She recognized it instantly. The handwriting on top was her own, written decades ago in dark marker, "Jason, child. Hood keepsakes." She hadn't opened it since moving. Sitting on the edge of her bed, she lifted the lid. Inside lay mementos preserved through years of transitions, a faded baseball cap, a bundle of pencil drawings, a ticket stub from a school play. Beneath them all was a single photograph, edges curled with time. It was Jason at 10 years old, arms wrapped tightly around her waist, face pressed into her chest. The picture had been taken just days after his father's funeral, a moment of grief captured by a neighbor trying to give them something to hold onto. Evelyn remembered how Jason clung to her that day as if the world might collapse without warning. She traced her thumb lightly over the boy's face. How easily love could be forgotten when someone else rewrote the script around it. She rose slowly, walked into the living room, and set the photo beside Mila's drawing, the one with the uneven lettering declaring she wanted to live with Grandma, past and future, side by side. The doorbell rang. Jason stood outside, his shoulders hunched, his expression a mixture of shame and caution. He stepped inside when she nodded, stopping short at the sight of the little gallery on her shelf, Mila's art and his childhood photo displayed without ceremony. His gaze lingered a long time on the picture. "I didn't know," he said finally, "about the bags, about her putting your things out like that." Evelyn didn't soften, she didn't harden either, she simply met the words with the steadiness they required. "You didn't ask," she said, "you didn't notice." The truth landed gently but irrevocably. Jason winced, the realization cutting deeper than accusation could. He sat on the couch, elbows on his knees, searching for words that had evaded him for weeks. "Things got noisy," he muttered. "Kendra said you were taking over the house, that you were disrupting things. I thought it was temporary. I thought she'd talk to you." Evelyn studied him, the grown man who still carried traces of the boy in the photograph, the boy who had once clung to her as if she were the single unmoving point in a spinning world. "You believed what made your life easier," she said quietly, "not what was true." Jason's breathing hitched, he looked away. Evelyn walked to her desk and opened a drawer. From it, she withdrew a familiar set of papers, a copy of the original co-signed documents. The ink had not faded, neither had the responsibilities tied to them. She placed the papers gently on the coffee table in front of him. "This is what bought you the house," she said. "Not favors, not assumptions, not convenience." Jason stared at the documents, his face tightening as he absorbed everything he had taken for granted. She wasn't trying to shame him, she was giving him clarity, the kind he'd avoided for years. After a long silence, Evelyn spoke again, her tone calm but resolute. "I'm changing my will." Jason's head snapped up, fear sparking behind his eyes. "You've made it clear where your loyalties lie," she continued, "and I need to protect what comes after me." He swallowed hard. "Mom, please don't." "This isn't punishment," she said, "it's protection." Jason's chest rose sharply as he tried and failed to form a rebuttal. He wasn't prepared for consequences that didn't come from anger but from intention. Outside, wind brushed the windows, carrying the rustle of the cottonwoods below. Evelyn felt the shift again, subtle, inevitable. She picked up Mila's drawing and smoothed the creases with her palms. Because there were choices still ahead of her. And the next one would sever something Jason never expected to lose. By early spring, the condo finally felt like hers. Plants lined the windowsills, soft greens catching the afternoon light, the basil thriving under her steady care. A woven rug warmed the living room floor, and a small shelf beside the couch held Mila's puzzles, crayons, and the stack of books she insisted on rereading every visit. Nothing extravagant. Just peaceful. Just chosen. Evelyn hung the last frame on the hallway wall, Mila's watercolor painting of a blue sky and two figures standing beneath it. The simple image filled the space with a sense of quiet continuity she hadn't felt in years. She stepped back, studying the finished home around her, and let her shoulders drop in a way that felt like exhaling an old burden. A soft knock came at the door. Carmen stepped inside with a small tin of loose-leaf tea, her warm smile settling into the room like sunlight. "I love what you've done with the place," she said, taking in the tidy furniture, the soft lighting, the touches that spoke of a life rebuilt with intention. They settled at the small kitchen table, steam rising from both cups. Carmen's eyes drifted to the framed documents on a nearby shelf, papers Evelyn had preserved not out of pride but out of clarity. "You got everything in writing," Carmen said. "That's rare, most people try to handle family problems with wishful thinking." Evelyn stirred her tea slowly. "I had no choice," she replied, then quieter, "and now I have peace." Carmen nodded, a knowing sadness threading her expression. "Peace is earned, and you earned yours." When Carmen left, Evelyn returned to her usual rhythm, watering plants, folding laundry, tidying the space in small, though tearful movements. The condo hummed with quiet satisfaction, the kind she denied herself for too long. That evening, a new envelope waited in her mailbox, her lawyer's letter. She opened it at the counter, eyes tracing the clean lines of legal confirmation. The final deed transfer was complete. Her share fully cashed out. No remaining ties. Evelyn set the letter down with deliberate calm. It wasn't triumph, it wasn't bitterness, it was closure, simple, steady, final. Her phone buzzed. A message from Jason. "Can we talk about the will?" She read it without emotion, then powered the phone off and placed it face down on the table. Some doors didn't need slamming, some simply needed to remain closed. Later that night, Mila settled into the guest bedroom, now officially her room, with a pile of stuffed animals and a nightlight that cast soft constellations across the ceiling. They read 2 stories, then 3, until Mila grew sleepy enough to rest her head on Evelyn's arm. "Grandma," she whispered. "Yes, sweetheart. It feels like I'm home when I'm here." The words landed gently, but they reverberated through Evelyn in a way she hadn't anticipated. She brushed a hand over Mila's hair, her chest tightening with something deep and grounding. "You're always welcome here," Evelyn said, "always." Mila nodded, already drifting, trusting that promise without hesitation. Evelyn sat beside the bed long after the girl had fallen asleep, listening to the soft rhythm of her breathing, a rhythm unburdened by tension, unshadowed by shifting loyalties. Outside, night settled over the building, quiet and certain. Inside, Evelyn finally felt something she hadn't felt in years. Rooted. She rose slowly, dimmed the light, and paused at the doorway, taking in the image of a child sleeping peacefully in a place that no one could take from her. And just as she stepped back into the hallway, her phone, still powered off on the kitchen table, vibrated once, then again, a cascade of unanswered messages waiting for a response that wasn't coming. Because tomorrow, a decision would be made. And it would not be the one Jason hoped for. The next morning arrived crisp and bright, sunlight spilling over the balcony rail as Evelyn dressed with deliberate care. Today was not about confrontation. It was about clarity, final, legal, and immovable. Her estate attorney's office sat on the 12th floor of a glass building downtown, quiet except for the muted hum of printers and distant elevator chimes. The attorney, Ms. Harrow, greeted her with the professional warmth of someone who had seen families fall apart and rebuild on paper more times than she could count. "Evelyn," she said, guiding her into a private conference room, "I reviewed your preliminary notes. Are you sure you want to move forward exactly as written?" Evelyn set her bag on the table, her expression calm, steady. "I want it airtight," she said, "no challenge possible." Ms. Harrow didn't blink, she simply pulled a new folder from her briefcase. "Then let's make it airtight." For the next hour, they crafted the structure line by line. The condo, her savings, her retirement account, personal valuables, every asset, every detail, every clause. All placed into a trust one Mila would inherit on her 21st birthday, but not directly. A third-party trustee would oversee the distribution, ensuring no interference, no manipulation, no loophole someone might try to pry open. When they reached the section on beneficiaries, Ms. Harrow paused. "And your son?" Evelyn looked out the window at Denver's skyline, solid and distant like the life she'd stepped away from. "Remove him entirely." "And your daughter-in-law? Bar her by name." There was no malice in her tone, only certainty. The attorney typed the changes, the keys clicking calmly beneath her fingers. When she finished, she slid the final draft across the table for review. Evelyn read every line, twice. Then picked up the pen. Her signature flowed with a graceful, practiced steadiness, not revenge. Resolution. Before closing the folder, she retrieved a handwritten letter she'd tucked into her purse that morning. The paper was thick, the ink dark, a message she'd rewritten 3 times until it felt true without being cruel. She placed it inside the trust packet. "Some things aren't forgotten, but they can be outgrown." Ms. Harrow glanced at the sealed envelope, then at Evelyn. Are you sure she should read that someday? She'll understand it when she's ready, Evelyn replied. That afternoon, Mila sat at Evelyn's kitchen table with a handful of colored pencils, humming softly. She drew the condo exactly as she saw it: square windows, a small balcony, a pot of basil, and two figures standing in front, one tall, one small. She pressed harder with the pencil as she wrote the title across the top. A Real Home. When she held it out proudly, Evelyn felt something inside her settle with a quiet finality. It's beautiful, she said, placing the drawing onto the refrigerator door with a magnet shaped like a sunflower. It joined the growing constellation of artwork that mapped out their new life. Jason received the legal notice 2 days later. He stood in his driveway, envelope in hand, reading the words under the harsh afternoon sun. His name struck through, his rights revoked. The trust structured beyond challenge, the estate fully removed from his future. No debate, no appeal. Just the facts. The document trembled only because his hands did. Inside the house, Kendra hovered by the window, watching him with a look that blended anger and disbelief. Anger at Evelyn, disbelief at how completely the ground had shifted beneath them. Jason folded the papers slowly, his face pale as realization carved deeper into him. He hadn't lost an inheritance. He'd lost his place in his mother's story. He looked up at the quiet street, wind rustling the trees, and understood for the first time that the consequences weren't theoretical anymore. They were written, filed, permanent. And somewhere across the city, Evelyn was preparing for the next and greatest closure. Because the legacy was decided. And the final reckoning hadn't yet arrived. The email arrived just after dawn, sliding into Evelyn's inbox with a polite chime that didn't match the desperation packed inside it. From Kendra Brooks. Subject: one last conversation. Kendra's message was long, too long. Flowery apologies tangled with veiled self-preservation, lines about misunderstandings, emotional strain, and how hard this year has been. She wrote about finances tightening, collaborations pausing, and how the neighborhood had turned cold. She ended with a sentence meant to sound conciliatory. We should talk, we need closure, you owe us that. Evelyn read the message once, her face perfectly still, then clicked the small box beside it and hit archive. No anger, no triumph, just a quiet end to a conversation she had never agreed to have. Her phone buzzed moments later, Carmen, already up, already aware of the morning's tone. Did you see her email? Carmen asked, voice calm, coffee steaming on her end. Yes, Evelyn replied. And I ignored it. A soft exhale trickled through the speaker, approving. Good, some bridges don't need burning, Carmen said, just silence. Evelyn stepped onto her balcony, the early light spilling across the city like soft gold. Silence, she'd learned, was not emptiness, it was a boundary, a shield, a decision. She set her phone aside and knelt beside the ceramic planters lining the railing. The basil she'd nurtured for months had grown thick with bright leaves. She trimmed them gently before checking the mint, the thyme, the small rosemary bush she'd coaxed back from near death. Each plant thrived under her steady care, nothing uprooted, nothing discarded. Inside the condo, Mila laughed full, unrestrained, as she built a tower of blocks near the window. Evelyn listened to the sound, letting it wash over her. No tension, no whispered corrections, no rules dictated by someone else's insecurities. Just joy. Just love without conditions. Later that week, Evelyn received an unexpected invitation from a local women's organization. A small seminar, nothing flashy, 20 or so attendees in a community center, but they wanted her to speak. The topic felt almost too fitting. How to protect your dignity without drama. At first, she considered declining. She wasn't a public figure and she had no desire to rehash the personal details of her ordeal. But the organizer assured her, no names, no specifics, just wisdom. So Evelyn agreed. On the day of the event, she stood at a simple podium in a room filled with women of every age, professionals, retirees, young mothers, all awaiting something they couldn't quite articulate. She didn't bring notes. She didn't need them. She spoke about boundaries that don't announce themselves but hold firm. about documentation as self-respect, about how silence can say more than confrontation, and about the danger of letting other people define your place in a home or in a life. At the end, someone asked gently, "If you had to summarize what you learned, what would you say?" Evelyn looked out over the quiet audience, her hands resting easily on the podium. "You can't be erased," she said, "if you remember who you are." The room didn't erupt with applause, it exhaled, a soft, collective release from women who recognized truth when they heard it. Afterward, as she gathered her coat, one attendee touched her arm. "Thank you," she whispered. "You reminded me I'm allowed to take up space." Evelyn smiled, small but warm. "We all are." That night, back in her condo, she opened the balcony door to the cool air and poured herself a cup of tea. Mila curled beside her, drawing quietly, the pencil scratching a soft rhythm. Evelyn closed her eyes, letting the simplicity of the moment root her again. No noise, no demands, no expectations, she hadn't chosen. But as she set her cup down, her phone vibrated across the table, not with Jason this time. It was a number she didn't recognize. And the message preview chilled the peaceful air. "Ms. Brooks, you need to be aware of something regarding Jason and Kendra. Please call me." The peace she'd earned wasn't gone. But something new was coming. The message from the unknown number had lingered in her mind overnight, but it didn't alter Evelyn's morning routine. She woke early, made oatmeal the way Mila liked it, with cinnamon and exactly 3 raisins, and helped her granddaughter lace her shoes before stepping out into the crisp Denver air. The walk to school had become a ritual neither of them questioned. Mila's hand fit easily into hers, swinging lightly as they moved down the sidewalk. Parents at drop-off smiled warmly, now recognition without intrusion. Teachers waved, greeting Evelyn by name, their voices carrying a quiet respect born not from gossip but from the simple observation of a woman who showed up consistently for a child. This place knew her, and she belonged here in a way she never had under Jason and Kendra's roof. After watching Mila run to join her classmates, Evelyn took a slow breath, letting the morning settle into her bones. She turned and walked home, sunlight brushing the tops of the trees like a quiet promise. Inside the condo, she opened her journal, a gift she'd bought herself after the sale, and began a new page. Her handwriting flowed with ease, steady and sure. Letting go isn't weakness. It's clarity. The truth in the sentence warmed her, not with pride but with relief. A life rebuilt through intention rather than obligation. Later that morning, while watering the basil on the balcony, Evelyn heard a rustle at her door. The daily newspaper lay waiting. She wasn't usually one for local features, but a headline caught her eye. Housing disputes reveal hidden co-ownership battles. The article detailed several cases where aging parents had been pushed out of homes they partially owned, quiet situations, often unreported. Halfway down the page, a quote appeared from an anonymous source described only as a retired HR manager whose case prompted new bank oversight policies. Evelyn recognized her own words instantly. She smiled softly, not because she wanted attention, but because truth had a way of finding its footing, and this time it had landed exactly where it needed to. Across town, Jason and Kendra's cul-de-sac buzzed with whispers again, but for different reasons. Their house had been listed, a quiet, understated posting, almost embarrassed to exist. Multiple liens resolved. The phrase sat heavily in the description, unavoidable. Neighbors noticed the moving truck parked discreetly at dawn. Kendra carried herself stiffly, a shadow of the image-curated woman she once projected. Jason kept his head low, avoiding conversations he once navigated with ease. Their exit was quiet. Not tragic. Just small. A life built on appearances rarely left echoes. That afternoon, Evelyn returned home after a grocery run and found a new drawing taped crookedly to her refrigerator door. Mila's handwriting had improved slightly, but the sentiment remained beautifully earnest. 2 figures, one tall, one small, stood beside a square house with a bright yellow window, beneath it, in neat pencil. "Me grandma." The simplicity of it filled the kitchen with warmth. Evelyn steadied her hand on the counter, breathing in the soft, unexpected swell of emotion, not sorrow, not even joy. Belonging. True, quiet belonging. She reached into a drawer and took out a small velvet box. Inside lay the old house keys, the ones whose weight had once symbolized shared ownership, shared responsibility, shared family. Keys that had opened doors she eventually learned had never truly been hers to walk through. She placed them inside the box, pressing her fingertips lightly against the cool metal one final time before closing the lid. The latch clicked softly, a sound not of ending but of release. She set the box on a high shelf, out of reach, out of mind, out of her future. Outside, the afternoon light softened over the city. Inside, the condo breathed with life, plants thriving, toys scattered with love, drawings declaring truths adults struggled to speak. Evelyn stood in the center of her home, the weight of the past no longer pulling at her shoulders. "They thought they were throwing me out," she wrote in her journal's margin. "But I was already walking away with everything that mattered."